All right, let's call the meeting to order. Kaylee, roll call, please.
Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Here.
Commissioner Taylor?
Here.
Vice Chair Gove and Commissioner Freeman are noted absent.
Okay, Pledge of Allegiance. I'll start. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I always skip it. On my own deal. Okay. So I'll announce public comment. This is a moment when anybody can come up and comment on anything that has nothing to do with the agenda. Nobody's coming up? Okay, to see no public comments, I'll close that. Next would be the approval of the minutes.
I move we approve the minutes from our previous meeting.
Second.
Any discussion on that? You have any corrections? No? You were busy, huh? Okay, I think we're ready.
Chair Claren?
Aye.
Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Aye.
Commissioner Taylor?
Yes.
All right, so on the agenda, I see public hearings. We don't have any? Well, number 6.
No minor review items.
Oh, I guess I need new glasses. No minor review items. So major, 7.1 is a request to continue the public hearing for the Village of Grays Crossing Car Wash. Staff to say why. Yumi?
The applicants requested this on Thursday. They wanted to do a little more analysis into their design.
Got it. At this time, I'll open public comment for all of you out there. Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. I need a motion to continue, please.
I will make that motion.
Second.
Any other discussion? Roll call.
Chair Claren?
Aye.
Commissioner Taylor?
Aye.
Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Aye.
And 7.2, the item we've all been waiting for. Let's have Yumi do a staff presentation, please.
It's
Thank
like
you.
deja vu all over again. So good evening, commissioners. At our last planning commission meeting in June, you received information on the purpose of these objective design standards and the process. And at that meeting, you assigned yourselves a deadline to give us comments on these objective design standards. I received those comments. We received those comments. So I thank you for all your diligent effort and time that you took into making those comments. We received them, we incorporated them, and we do note that while we did incorporate many of them, we did not incorporate every single one. So if you find something that you would like to discuss in detail, feel free to bring that up during your deliberation or your clarifying questions and your deliberation. Design Workshop, our consultant on this objective design standards effort, is here to present again on the project and the process, and we'll give an overview of the changes that we're proposing tonight since you last reviewed the documents. So with that, I'll turn that over to Jessica and Callie with Design Workshop.
Great, thank you, Yumi. We are excited to be with you again tonight. I'm Jessica Garrow, joined by Callie New, and we're going to run through a presentation. Yumi, we cannot see the presentation screen from here. Do we need to jump over to YouTube to see that?
Yes, I guess so. We'll work on the IT side of it, but if you could do that currently, that'd be helpful.
Okay. I'm going to carry on with this first part while we try to get that squared away. So, Yumi, you have the speaking wheel, so I think we'll be able to move forward. So, for the agenda today, we wanted to provide an overview of the objective design standard process, kind of a continuation of the conversation from the last meeting.
Jessica, can I interrupt? Sorry, we're having also technical difficulties on this side, so we'll pause for a moment while if the chair is amenable, we'll take a quick recess.
And I don't know if it's possible, but if we could get our speakers over there, then we could see our presentation and our speakers at the same time instead of going like this.
I don't think we could do that tonight, but we'll note that for the future.
Oh, they were just out there a second ago, weren't they?
It's whatever's on cable television. All right, we're back in action. I'll turn it back over to Jessica.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So tonight, as I said, we wanted to provide an overview of the process, highlight a few of the items that we covered in our last conversation with you, specific to state law requirements, cover the community engagement process. We wanted to spend most of the time tonight summarizing the proposed code changes, including the key changes that have occurred since our last work session with you in June, and then review some next steps and process moving forward. Yumi is going to be addressing some of the additional code changes that are in the packet, and Callie and I will be covering the objective design standards. So in terms of background, why are we here? State of California passed a series of laws over the past few years that require multifamily development projects to be reviewed against objective design standards, and we'll talk about what that means on the next slide. The legislation was intended to help address the statewide housing shortage and support the development of multifamily as well as mixed-use development projects. While they require that design standards be updated, the intent from the state is to allow individual local governments to create customized standards that fit their individual needs. And so the standards that are in Truckee are not going to be the same that are in communities in Marin County, for instance. It's going to be different based off of the specific community context. From a process perspective, the legislation seeks to create clearer requirements and try to streamline the overall process. So there's some process changes that are included as well. So what is an objective design standard? Objective standards are measurable, they're verifiable, and they're mandatory. So they will include sometimes specific dimensions. They will describe requirements using language like shall and must. So they're more specific. On the other hand, subjective design standards are vague and they tend to be optional. So they use words like should or may. So as we discussed in the last work session, an example is on this slide. So stating that a setback should be in line or consistent with neighborhood character is subjective and not something that we want to include in the code. Saying a specific setback of at least 15 feet or 20 feet is objective and measurable. And so everywhere possible, that's what we've done within the code language. The objective design standards will apply to all multifamily developments. So that includes townhomes, apartments and condominiums, as well as duplexes and triplexes and mixed use development. New single family subdivisions are also subject to the requirements. And really importantly, existing single family subdivisions are not required to comply with the proposed objective design standards. So as I mentioned, there are some requirements in state law related to the review process. So the review process for applications under the objective design standards will be different than what the town of Truckee uses today. So the state requires that these residential projects be reviewed against objective design standards at the staff level. So these would be administrative reviews related to the specific design. The legislation prohibits local governments from denying a project based off of any subjective design standards or guidelines, but the town is proposing language that provides an option for a developer or a designer to go through a more flexible path. So they would go through the more standard design guideline process and have an opportunity to get community feedback and have that conversation with the planning commission. The town cannot require a developer to use that option, but that is something that we've included here so that there's that option. So if the developer chose that path, any project that has 11 or more units or includes more than 26,000 square feet of disturbance would be reviewed by the Planning Commission, which has been the traditional review process. Really importantly, other reviews like environmental reviews will be continue to be required. So that does not change with the state law or with the proposed changes in front of you tonight. So we wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about the projects that would be impacted by these new objective design standards. So this slide illustrates what will and will not be subject to those new standards. So new multifamily projects that have 2 or more units would be required to meet the objective design standards, and any mixed-use project that includes 2/3 of its floor area dedicated to a residential use would also be subject to the requirement. Any existing multifamily projects are not subject to this new proposed code section. The only exception would be for major remodels or additions to an existing multifamily project that affect more than 50% of the building. And in those circumstances, when they're impacting and disturbing more than 50% of the building, they would need to comply with certain objective design standards based off of what they are disturbing and changing on the building. For single family homes, the objective design standards will only apply to new subdivisions. So existing single family subdivisions, or if there was an individual single family lot and someone was developing a home there, those would not be subject to the objective design standards. It's really important to note that the code has different standards for multifamily and single family development. And many of the standards that we'll review tonight apply only to multifamily developments. Callie's going to review that in more detail when she covers the code changes, but we wanted to just highlight here that we recognize, and the code language recognizes, that there are different design considerations for multifamily versus single family, and so that's reflected in the code. So in terms of the process, we began with a review of the existing design standards, town plans, as well as requirements from state law. We completed some community engagement activities and incorporated that into draft documents. Draft code language was shared last month prior to the work session, and the updated language was included in today's packet. And from here, we'll have a conversation with you, and then next steps would be moving forward into the adoption process. So in terms of engagement, we had a detailed survey in the fall of 2021, and then held a series of focus group conversations on some interim drafts. And we wanted to just highlight a couple of things from the survey. We heard about the importance of things like environmental considerations, and ensuring that design remains true to Truckee's character. So items on the screen are some of the key issues that came up from the survey. When we think about environment, we heard a lot about the importance of wildfire resistant construction, preservation of open space, green building, and energy efficient construction. In terms of architectural character, again, thinking about making sure that we're reflective of Truckee's character, but it should maintain a mountain character, and that clustering of development to support open spaces was something that was really important. We also heard through the survey and through conversations with our focus groups that building orientation, articulation was really important, and screening of parking was a critical aspect. From the focus group conversations, we held a number of meetings with them, and they were really important for that iteration process. And so they helped us review a few drafts before the latest draft was released in June. And we're really grateful for that group for their work through the process. So that leads us to this summer, and we wanted to just highlight some of the ways the town has sought to get the word out about the project. So in addition to the work during the engagement phase of the project, there's been significant effort over the last few months to get the word out about the draft language and the adoption process. So the draft document was published on June 1st for public comment, and we held the informational work session with you on June 20th. Additionally, the document was presented to the Historic Preservation Advisory Commission on June 14th. And some of their feedback has been incorporated into the updated document. And a number of email blasts have gone out to the community and key stakeholders, architects, MapCat, and such. So really trying to get the word out that we're at the point in the process where we're moving into adoption, and want to make sure we have an opportunity to hear from the community on those that code language. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Callie, and she's going to run through some of the changes from our last meeting.
Thanks, Jessica. These are the itemized code sections that are affected by the objective design standards. If you do want to follow along, they'll be referenced at the top of the slide for any of the changes that are listed. So we wanted to summarize what we heard from you and how we used your feedback. And we'll be going through each of these items in more detail in the presentation. So just to go through what we heard from you, we understood that we needed to clarify regulations related to multifamily developments and single family subdivisions and which requirements applied to each type of housing type. We knew that we needed to clarify some technical terms and provide definitions. There was feedback that the site map diagrams were a little bit unclear at times and that they could help to exemplify what the code language was saying better. We knew that we needed to clarify how design regulations were layering and impacting other regulations and kind of provide a clearer understanding of how the interplay between different sections. There was a call for greater flexibility in a number of areas, including site orientation, landscaping, roof pitch and form, materials, and color. And we heard specific feedback about some dimensional requirements for single-family subdivisions. And then there was a number of comments about affordability and how some of the requirements were impacting affordability and the ability to deliver product at a reasonable price. So kind of starting from the top in terms of clarifying regulations, if you could go to the next slide, Yumi. Based on our conversation, we identified a need to more clearly identify how regulations pertain to multifamily developments versus single family subdivisions. And so this language is taken, what's on the screen is taken directly from the code. So the majority of the regulations, those found in sections 18.25.050 through 18.25.100, so 5 different sections, relate to multifamily developments specifically. Single family developments are only subject to those outlined in 18.25.120. Or excuse me, 110. And then residential mixed use projects are subject to the multifamily standards, so 050 through 100, as well as those found in section 120. And then multifamily residential projects in the DVL zone district are subject to the multifamily standards in addition to the 130. So you can look for that language at the beginning of the section and can kind of use that as a guide. We also updated in front of all of the subsections labeled if it was multifamily or new single family subdivision to help clarify that as well. We added 3 new definitions in our definition section, including crusher, screen, facade, and podium parking. So you can see that as well in section 040. In terms of the site map diagrams, several people pointed out that the diagrams were not clearly linked to the content and that some things were labeled and didn't need to be. So we simplified the labeling for site maps, referencing just what section was relevant, and then added front and side street labels wherever possible, and hope that that helps to clarify the intent of those. There are several regulations that aim to reduce the massing and add articulation of multifamily buildings. And at times it was a little bit unclear how those regulations would layer. So we simplified this section by incorporating roof line standards into the massing section. So those are removed out of the roof section and into here. And then we also brought the material variation standards to provide facade breaks. So all standards that are listed on the screen apply to multifamily buildings depending on the building height. And so there's kind of less different sections where these types of requirements would apply. We heard that greater flexibility is needed in design, specifically related to site orientation, parking, roof pitch and form, materials, and color. You'll remember that before the code required that buildings be parallel to the street edge. And so we added in flexibility to allow the building orientation to be sited to facilitate passive solar gain based on your feedback. Related to parking, we've provided more options for how the blank wall of a parking structure is broken up. There's landscaping options or wrap development options, and we up the standards for podium parking. So now this is required for projects with 100 units, where before this threshold was 40. And we heard that flexibility with roof pitch and form is needed, and that a flatter roof is sometimes desired. And so the shed roof form now allows a minimum of 112, whereas before it was 412. The code also allows for flat roofs for mixed-use developments, structures larger than 10,000 square feet, and for utility placement. And we clarified that up to 2 roof types are permitted, and multiple roof pitches are permitted to provide for roof line variation. We updated the materials and colors section to allow for bright colors in the HP overlay district, except for neon and fluorescence, and all white facades. Brick, stucco, and aluminum cladding are now allowed with specific applications. Before they were prohibited. For roofs, white materials are allowed on flat roofs that cannot be seen from the public right-of-way. And this was kind of striking a middle ground, as some desire white roofs for solar reflectivity, but we also received a comment that was opposed to flat white roofs. So we also added a section that promotes the use of materials that reflect solar energy. And you can see that in the solar reflectivity language. We adjusted the dimensional requirements for single-family subdivisions. So we removed the maximum depth requirement. It was 40 feet, and that's been removed completely. And then we increased the maximum height for garage, single-story garages to 15 feet. To address the comment that requirements for variation do not support affordability, we allowed for mirrored designs. So this reduces the amount of building designs by half if that were to be employed. So you can see how many building designs are required per number of parcels. And that's for single family subdivisions. And then in the open space and common outdoor area, to add clarity to what's required here, there was a couple of comments or questions about this. So there are a list of 5 options for how to provide a built recreational amenity, which is required for projects with 5 or more units. And playground features can satisfy that requirement for buildings with any number of units, but playgrounds are explicitly required for projects with 40 or more 2-bedroom units. And they must be 2,500 square feet. And that size requirement scales with the number of units until a threshold of 10,000 square feet, which is equivalent to the size of 2 basketball courts. So we consulted some playground design experts on that size and found that it was an appropriate size for that number of housing units.
Thank you, Callie. I'll take over from here since this is outside of the objective. My part will be outside of the objective design standards chapter and looks at the rest of the development code changes that are also intended to make the standards for residential projects objective. But there are current standards or current guidelines that exist within our code right now that we're just trying to make sure that it meets the needs of the requirements of the state to make sure they're objective. So the most substantive one is the height measurement standard. And this one would also apply to single-family residential dwellings in all subdivisions, including Todd, Honor, Glenshire, existing areas. But this was something that came up through the 2040 general plan update, where the council directed us to review the town's height measurement standard to ensure it is appropriately responding to the town's needs. So we reviewed standards for multiple jurisdictions, including local jurisdictions and other mountain communities outside of California, within California. And many of them rely on the same standard the town currently employs, which we'll talk about in a second. But there are others that have much more complex standards as well. So we thought we focused on TRPA, so another jurisdiction within the region, because we felt that their vision for, or their purpose behind their height measurement was responsive to the environment, and we thought consistency within the region was important and helpful to our design professionals. So we made some changes to the TRPA height measurement standard, but to make it more objective and to simplify it. But the basis of this height measurement is truly on the TRPA height measurement standard. So just to give you a little background, the current standard in the development code is we measure height for all buildings in Truckee as the vertical distance from the highest point of the structure to the average grade of where the building walls touch the ground. And we have special allowances for split roofs where we give a little more leeway to those to encourage terracing down hillsides, and we also provide allowances for single-family dwellings on slopes. But we don't have exceptions for roof appurtenances like chimneys or mechanical equipment on roofs. So the proposed standard, which is based on the TRPA height standard, is the difference between the point of lowest natural grade along an exterior wall of the building to the highest point of the building, excluding roof appurtenances and chimneys. So it's a more basic measurement where we don't need to look at different points or finding an average of the grade. We just find the lowest point where the exterior building wall touches the grade and take that to the highest ridge point of the building. And if there's a roof, if there's a chimney, that's not necessarily within that building envelope that we would create that, we would analyze the building height through. Additionally, we're proposing that for single-family dwellings that on slopes of 10% or greater, we're proposing another standard to encourage terracing down the hillside, but also understanding that there may be some leniencies that we want to provide to single-family dwellings in our community. So in alignment with TRPA's current standard, we're proposing that we allow for single-family dwellings on such slopes to divide the building into 3 segments, where each segment has to meet that height standard. And then the overall height of the building is required to be the total maximum height from the lowest point of lowest natural grade to the highest point of the structure is not allowed to exceed 150% of the average maximum height of the building segments. So if there was a single-family dwelling in Tawadana or wherever within our RS zoning district, our single-family residential zoning district, where each segment was 35 feet in height, which is our maximum height standard for residential, the total from the very top of the building to the very lowest part of the building would be required to be 50 feet. So that is actually higher than what we would allow currently within our code, but does allow for, requires the terracing down the hillside. We also are requiring that in order to use the segmented building height standard, that front segment that from the lowest point to the highest point is required to be 28 feet in height. And that's in alignment with the TRPA standard, and that's essentially to make the front facade more pedestrian friendly and less of a larger mass at the front setback. Additionally, we're proposing to allow for rooftop appurtenances and chimneys to exceed that height standard by 10% or 5 feet, whichever is less, which is greater than what we allow currently in our code. So that's our most substantive change. We can go back and discuss that a little further if you need more details. It is a little complex, or technical, really, not that complex. So the next change that we're proposing, since you last reviewed the development code's language, is related to legal nonconforming structures. So legal nonconforming structures are structures that were approved at the time of construction but are no longer in compliance with were approved with the standards in place at the time of construction, but are no longer in compliance with today's standards. So that may mean that a building was built 5 feet from the setback when the setback was 5 feet, but now our setbacks are typically 10 feet from this property line. But it was legal then, we consider it legal nonconforming now. and we allow it to continue in perpetuity until generally it's torn down voluntarily. Today, we allow additions to these legal non-conforming single-family dwellings in the side setback with a land use permit, a zoning clearance, up to 5 feet from the property line. So we allow for incremental encroachment or encroachment into the side setback if you already are encroaching to the side setback. So in order to make this more objective, we are proposing to remove the requirement for this land use entitlement as long as specific criteria are met, similar to our allowances for narrow lots. So we also have an allowance within our development code that allows projects or sites with narrow lots to have a little more leeway into the side setback. So we're carrying that criteria over, and all of this criteria is the same that's allowed for narrow lots, which includes that the roof pitch is required to be directed away from the side setback or has a retention system to avoid snow shed into someone else's property, specific window opening requirements to reduce potential conflict with privacy with your neighbor. The addition is required to be equal to or less than the existing setback. So if a building is currently 6 feet from the setback, the new addition can't be 5 feet. It has to be 6 feet. And then the addition is required to be 15 feet away from an adjacent structure on an adjacent property. So if someone has a building on the property next door, your project would be impacted by that developed site. One thing we didn't discuss in the current language in your staff report today is how tall that legal nonconforming structure or the addition to the legal nonconforming structure can get. So staff right now is recommending that we include additional language to only allow one additional story or 12 feet above the legal nonconforming structure. So a one-story building on the side setback or two-story building can have a one-story addition on top of or next to the building, but you can't do a two-story addition on top of a one-story addition in the side yard setback. The purpose of this new language is to make the current intent of the section is to, well, that one-story language that I'm proposing today is to ensure that the impacts to the neighbors are not as exacerbated. While the building is getting higher, there may be more impacts with snow load, but our current standards allow for additions that go up a story. So we're trying not to change the intent of the current standard too much during the subjective design standards practice, and into hoping in the future that we'll look at this this legal nonconforming side yard setback standard as part of a larger general plan update process where we look at legal nonconformities and whether or not we want to support them in our community. But right now our intent is to try to just keep us constrained to just making things more objective, taking out additional land use processes, streamlining it to make sure that projects that want to go this route can just submit a building permit as long as these boxes are checked. We're also proposing to add additional language in the fences section that would only allow wood and wrought iron fencing for projects using the objective design standards. If there's a project that wants to use a flexible design standard approach or flexible design review approach, other materials could be looked at. Since you last reviewed the changes, we are also proposing slight changes to the maximum site disturbance requirements for single-family uses to reduce potential visual and environmental impacts. We are also incorporating new language that requires ADUs to be located behind primary dwellings in the historic district to mitigate potential impacts to the neighborhood character of the historic district. And for the streamlined residential review process, we updated the table to hopefully make the flow chart more clear, but I'm open to suggestions if there's other ways that you think would be helpful. We also note that we received some comments from our planning commissioners about updating our code with new language, more current language, to move away from shall to must or will, and to improve readability of numerals. We acknowledge these comments. We understand that these are valid comments, but we're proposing to defer these changes to a more comprehensive future review of the development code where we can make it more user-friendly as a whole rather than piecemealing this one chapter. And that is an action within the 2040 general plan, which we will get to in the future. We also received some other comments from our planning commissioners that we thought were minor edits that we can support as staff. First, related to the design guidelines section, which is not the objective design standards, there was some language that was struck out that we're proposing to put back in, which allows for case-by-case review of materials, since that is an allowance for design guidelines. We're proposing to remove some additional language that doesn't necessarily make sense or provide more clarity to what the purpose is for multifamily residential design guidelines. We're also proposing to remove maybe some antiquated language about roll-up doors for garages and just relying on automatic door openers. The Planning Commission also noted that in the design guidelines, there's language that supports orienting buildings in random positions, which is counter to what the objective design standards we're seeking. So we're proposing to remove that. Within the wetland section, we're proposing to remove minor. That was just a typo, a miss on staff's part. So we're proposing to make that change. We're also proposing to remove some duplicative language that's within the legal nonconforming side yard setback section that was added unintentionally, and then clarifying in the hillside development section that the range between 20% to 30% gradings and structures can be allowed even through the objective design standards section if a geotechnical report is provided and the potential for environmental impact is not present. Additionally, our planning commissioner noted that within the hillside development section, there's a section that allows for roofs or encourages roofs on lower levels for decks and open spaces, which is counter to what was in the objective design standards, which prohibits residential rooftop decks. So that'll be a discussion topic. It was a public comment that we received that no rooftop decks should be allowed, and that was incorporated in the proposed language, but that should be something that Planning Commission may want to discuss today. And then I think that's just duplicative. So that was a lot of information. A lot of those are minor edits, but if you would like to go back, we can always go back and discuss them in detail. But that is part of our recommendation. That will be part of our recommendation today to make those changes within your the proposed ordinance resolution language. So moving forward, I put together some questions for Planning Commission. You are not obligated to follow these questions, but sometimes I feel like with such large projects, they can be helpful to help you format your discussion. So as always, you provide any comments on what needs to be clarified or defined. Are there any other standards that we're missing? Should any be removed? Is mirror design sufficient to reduce potential cost? Is it sufficient also to have enough design change within or variation within a project? Are SRI coatings sufficient to meet the needs of solar reflectivity if white roofs are prohibited, or are we okay with white roofs being allowed as currently proposed within the language as long as it's not visible from the public right-of-way? Do we want stronger fence design requirements aside from just the materials? Are there certain types of fences you'd like to see in residential projects? And as I noted, one specific question we have for you is, are residential rooftop decks appropriate, and if so, where? We've received some public comments. There's a couple that trickled in at the last minute that I haven't had a chance to review. 5 were from members of or individual public members with edits and suggestions, and 1 from the Contractors Association requesting a continuance for more time to review. So tonight, based off of all the edits that we're proposing today and the edits that have been made in your staff report and your resolution in front of you today, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 2023-12, which would recommend approval to the Town Council of these development code amendments. And with the changes discussed in this presentation related to legal nonconforming side yard setbacks and those minor edits, and we're also recommending, and you would also recommend that the amendments be exempt from CEQA due to sections 15060C2, 15060C3, and section 15061B3. If you do make a recommendation today, that would go forward to the Town Council on August 22nd, 2023. So I open it up for questions to the Commission.
Okay, that was a lot. Sammy, Coral, do you have any clarifying questions for staff?
And one moment, we did get other copy edits from another planning commissioner, which provided a lot of grammatical and other non-substantive edits that we'll be incorporating into our future changes.
Unless you'd like me to go through them one by one,
No.
Mitch.
No. I trust your editing skills, Carl. Clarifying questions for staff, which includes,
Yes, Callie and Jessica.
Callie and Jessica, sorry. Sammy, do you have any?
I do. I just need to find in my notes where it is. Hold on one second. Or go ahead to Coral and then I can.
How
I
about
do
it?
have a couple of questions on the presentation. Thank you, Jessica and Callie and Yumi, for the presentation. So I had a question. You said on the height standards that they would also be applicable to existing single-family zone lots or new buildings, not just new subdivisions. Is that correct? Every new single-family dwelling or existing one, if it's being added to, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And what about in the historic preservation districts?
Yes, it would apply there.
Okay. So that's everywhere, including places that already have, what do you call them? CCNRs or whatever?
Subdivisions.
Okay, existing. Okay, everywhere, just everywhere. Okay. The other question, not related to the height, but related to just the general simplification of the code language. That's great that that's something that's planned. Is there a timeline for that at all?
I think
I
it's
know that's a
probably-
big one.
It's, I believe it's on the longer term spectrum of timelines. There is a part of the action is to create like more brochures and user-friendly handouts that will help people understand our code more easily. But that may happen more quickly than the overhaul of the development code.
I could see that, yeah. Then two questions related to roofs and decks that were covered in the presentation. And if we're going to get into this more detail later, my other commissioners maybe can tell me whether they think we are. When you refer to reviewing the white roofs from the right-of-way, does that include the right-of-way only around the immediate structure or also the right-of-way that's above a higher elevation than the structure?
It would be above as well. So if it's in the downtown High Street, has a good view of many of the downtown structures.
Okay. And then I'll just wait on further discussion of that and rooftop decks until we get to that, and if we're flipping through, depending on how you want to organize the discussion, Mitch.
Today it's right now, is clarifying questions. So something you didn't understand that was stated in the presentation. And then after that, we could start discussing whatever we need to discuss in more detail. Does that work? Sammy?
Yeah, that works for me. And I actually just reread the part that I had a question about and figured it out. So I don't think I have any clarifying questions. I do have some conversation to have, but
Yeah. Okay, so my clarifying question is, I'm starting to get confused on what is new and what is old and what is flexible and what is not and so Kurt Rankins and I want to submit the Jaboom Street project, but I don't want to streamline it. I want to go through the regular process. What's the difference?
So that would mean that the objective design standards chapter as a whole does not apply. There are provisions that apply, like the balcony standards and the open space requirements, but like the material requirements, the roof articulation standards, those would not apply to a flexible design review project. They would say, I want to do the flexible design review project, and that chapter, we would use the design guidelines instead. We'd decide not to use, we would not use objective design standards. We would not count how many windows you have or how much percentage of glazing you have. We wouldn't count how many roof types you have. It would probably go to architectural review, or it would go to historic preservation advisory commission, and they would provide us feedback on how they think they comply with our design guidelines.
Okay, so how does counting windows and roofs streamline the process? Isn't that more work?
So it's more work for, yes, there is more work for staff to analyze the project, and probably on the applicant's part to make sure that they're checking all the boxes in the objective design standards. The idea that the state has, which this is all driven by the state,
I know that.
is that it kind of takes out the subjectivity. So if somebody just doesn't like the project, that's not a good enough reason to disapprove a project. They would have to say it doesn't have 2 roofs. It has only 1 roof type, and that's why I'm denying this project. It just provides more clarity to the developer, and that's the purpose the reason why the state has implemented this requirement.
Okay, which makes sense. So does a streamlined project get pushed in front of other projects that are submitted?
No, we're also subject to the same Permit Streamlining Act for every project. So it kind of just goes in our queue, but we are subject to 30-day reviews for completeness, and then there's an additional 30-day review for consistency once we deem it complete. So we already have timelines that are built into our jobs as planners, so they would all projects are subject to that streamlining.
So in other words, a streamlined project doesn't go in front of anybody. It goes in the queue as it was received, just like any other project. The concept is the checking process is streamlined.
That's correct. And it would just mean that there isn't, if the application checks all the boxes and everyone feels confident that it's meeting the objective design standards, it means that it takes out the iterative process that we have often with architects and say, where we take it to architectural design review. Architects say that this would make it better, this tweak here, this tweak there, even though it's not necessarily based on a standard. It's just based on their expertise in architects. And it would take out that iterative process. And that takes time where the applicant has to go back, design the project, hope it meets the intent of what the architects on the design review committee have stated, and then resubmit and see if it does.
So basically, it either meets the objective design standards or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then they can redesign it, but there's no subjectivity. So I could see that being a time saver. We've all been through probably a design permitting process for a project we have, and the iterations do take a while.
It's the iterations, it's the back and forth really that gets streamlined, theoretically.
Sounds like it.
Theoretically. So we've removed affordability from this because this is not anything, this is as far away from affordable as this can be, as far as I can tell. From a building point of view, I mean, the more rules and regulations there are, the more expensive it is to build. That's just the way it goes.
I think it's one of the complexities of these objective design standards that, and I would say that as a town in the past, we do have a lot of affordable housing projects that probably wouldn't meet the standards of the objective design standards. But we have been willing partners with a lot of affordable housing projects without objective design standards, and using the flexible design review approach would still be an option for any of them.
Okay. I think that does it for clarifying questions. Sammy, Coral? Okay. So I think at this point, open it up to public comment. So don't rush, there's plenty of time to get to the podium. Please state your name. You have 3 minutes. There's a clock in front of you.
Thank you. Kurt Rankins, MWA Architects. I sent a letter. I don't know if you guys have received it. I figured that would take more than 3 minutes, so I put it in writing. The one that I didn't quite get into, because it took me more time to analyze, was some of these ins and outs and the heights. And really came down to, we're making this way more complicated than it needs to be. And you're right, Mitch, it's going to drive up the cost, not just in architects' time, but cost of construction. So I personally feel that we're going exactly opposed to the state's intent of affordable housing and getting units built. And this is going to drive the affordability away. So I think I'd like to go on the public record as declaring that the town is working against the state goals. I question the TRPA height standard as being any better than the town standard. We've worked with the building group where we've met with the different building officials in the area, and we've all tried to get consistency. We've had consistency on height standard, and now we're going to have inconsistency on height standard. Question is, it ain't broke, why are we trying to fix it? And what we're doing is we're disregarding on commercial stepping up the hillside. So years ago, we worked on a property up on Hilltop, and we were stepping massing, but we were connecting the buildings so that there was winter access between the buildings. That would not be possible. We wouldn't be able to step buildings up a hillside. We'd be forced to detach them, which seems kind of silly. So I believe the design guidelines for commercial should also work with the slope. The outdoor spaces, I heard the presentation on that you quote, check with consultants on the appropriate quantity. I'm curious about whether those consultants are factoring urban, rural, mountain town with trails and parks and access to nature, because these outdoor play structures are about 50 grand a pop, not including the land they're taking up. So we're in my letter I mentioned that I think that the quantity is excessive and expensive. In regards to the CEQA, I think going to not white roofs is against the cool roof standard set by the Energy Commission. You go to a darker roof, you've got summer solar gain and less reflectivity. So I think that we're going to have a hot body effect the darker the finish goes. So there is a reason why roofs are white, not just for the cool roofs, but also they hold up longer because they reflect the UV rays away, and therefore they hold up longer. So we're just adding long-term cost. Thank you. I'll take that as my cue.
Seeing no other public comment, I'm going to close public comment. All right. And now the long haul. Who wants to start? Coral.
Well, it seems like, and I defer to your judgment on how we organize this discussion, but there's a few topics that we probably want to hit. The overall affordability question. But without commenting, just a list, the affordability question, the roofs, we had the staff would like us to answer, comment on that, the roofs, the rooftop decks. Let's see.
Well, we could answer the staff questions that Yumi put in front of us at the end of her presentation first, and then I assume we were just going to go down the objective design standards in order.
Okay.
That was how I saw it. Does
That
that
works
work
works
for
for me.
everybody?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay, so Yumi had those 7 questions. There we go. Okay, so let's start from the bottom and go up. Are residential rooftop decks appropriate? Any comments?
I can start us off.
Yeah.
I think we need to also clarify whether we're talking multifamily or single family in these residential rooftop decks. I feel like in a multifamily situation, depending on the zone or location, they could be a great asset or amenity for a building. So I would be supportive of allowing them, especially since the current code in places already does allow for them. Single family homes, I'm not sure it's appropriate. I don't think they're appropriate for single family homes in new subdivisions, but I think maybe having a conversation around multifamily and where and when might be interesting.
It seems like rooftop decks would be a nice amenity for multifamily housing. They might offer an opportunity to incorporate some of the exterior space that's required. And my biggest question on them is, do they make sense to construct because of water issues? So that's what my question to you is, does it make sense? Is it hard? Is it prohibitive? Is it just actually not feasible to keep them watertight?
Well, in theory, everything could be made watertight. In reality, does it work? As a contractor, when people would ask me about living space under a deck, I always said no, and I wouldn't take the job on, to be quite frank, because the chances of leaking are 98%. However, you don't know if it's up to us to make that decision for the public. I think people can make their own decision. I don't think it should be in there. I think, yes, they should be allowed up to the designer or the owners. I love the multifamily concept, Sammy and Coral. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't mandate it. I wouldn't say you couldn't do it. I would let it up to the designer, personally.
I would agree with that approach.
It seems reasonable. I don't understand why you would think it wouldn't be appropriate on a single-family dwelling. I know there's one of the nicest set of decks in town is on a single-family dwelling over Lorian Power's studio.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of the nicest decks in town, and it's 2 decks over living space.
Oh, I think
But I
over
don't know
living
why.
space is fine. I mean, I'm talking maybe like rooftop, top floor deck, like a widow's walk or something.
Uh-huh.
I don't think that's appropriate for this community. Not that the height standards
visually, you're saying.
would allow for that now, but something like that were to protrude above the kind of top floor of a building. I think a deck over living space. I guess maybe this is something that we need to be more conscious in our definitions, where a rooftop deck is defined, deck space over living space is defined. Maybe
I
we just need to
immediately
be
went to a
more
garage,
clear.
right? Most people do it over a garage.
Sure, and
in
that's not where
single
I went. I guess I went to a more urban form where you have, a structure without any, or, a single form structure without many
Yeah, and they go to the roof
different
to hang out.
articulations, and it goes to the roof, which is fine in certain settings. I don't think in residential subdivisions in Truckee is appropriate, but I think over living space would be fine. Over a garage, I think makes sense. If someone wants to do it, we shouldn't disallow them from that. But maybe we just need to be more clear in how we define that space.
That seems like a good idea.
So, take a stab at it.
I don't know if I'm the right person to be defining that.
Well, give a draft so that it can be.
Well, I think so. I think we're thinking above living space, not on the top floor. Is that what we're thinking?
That's what
So
it
this
sounds
is
like
on
you're saying. Yeah.
Page 35 of 34. Residential item B2, that's where it is. Residential rooftop decks are prohibited.
And again, is strictly in the objective design? Or is this in both the flexible and the objective? Or the subjective and objective?
Since this is a balconies section, it's for both.
And this is the multifamily? Is in both the single and multi? Because I
This-
saw it in multi.
This is in multifamily.
Is there any reason to not prohibit it, other than just allow the flexibility if they want to put one there? But if it's a widow's walk, so this isn't at New England.
Right. That's
Yeah.
kind of where my thought
Yeah.
kind of went. Although I don't think the height standards as written now would, or previously would have allowed for that with no projections above the.
Yeah,
gonna not
it's
even
a
say the
safety
word.
thing to,
Yeah.
that
Well, you
creates
could-
a flat surface.
You could say just not on the top floor of a single-family residence and everywhere else. Does that kind of cover it? Keep it simple?
I think so, and then maybe staff can wordsmith that language a little bit to make it. But I think you understand the intent of
Just
where we're
not
going
on
with
the
that.
top floor of single family. We can double check to make sure. I don't believe that the balcony standard applies to single family subdivision, so.
But would you also prohibit it, my other 2 commissioners, would you also think we should prohibit it on multis or not?
I
You're saying
think not.
If they want their 2% possibility of having a dry space underneath, they can go for it?
Yeah, and it might also help them meet, if they're on a more constrained site, just space constraint, it may help them meet that outdoor space requirement.
I'm good with what
Vertically
you said
then.
then.
Goes to what Kurt was saying, so.
Okay. Next.
Okay. That takes care of the last question. Do we want strong fence design requirements? So, Yumi, why is that question here? I'm kind of, what's the reasoning behind it?
I believe it's, well, I was pointed out to me, I don't know by who, but there was no fence, I think it was our consultant, there was no fence standards in our objective design standards. So within our fence section of our code, I thought we should include something for what we wanted for objective design standards, but then for materials. But I didn't know if there needed to be other standards that you may want to see. Like, do you want specific heights that you want? I mean, up to 6 feet maximum. Do you want it more transparent? I did add language that the wrought iron fence shouldn't be overly decorative, which may or may not be objective, but we'll try our best.
I would say that's not.
We tried, I think I said it has to be orthogonal and without spikes. Something basic.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah.
That is what you said. 'Cause
So,
I had to look up the word orthogonal. That's why I remember it.
and when I was looking through the design guidelines, which our chair, Mitch, looked through much more closely than I did, I guess, in this last review, he noted there was a fence design guideline within there that I didn't see within our standards. So if you wanted to explore that a little further, there was more discussion about having transparent fencing as a desired element within projects, but it's not necessarily, it may not be of much interest to you.
So, can we pull up what I had found? Do you remember where that is? Because I don't.
There's a whole section on fence and wall design guidelines within the design guidelines section, which we didn't capture within any other, within our objective design standards. And many of these are, I think you talked about chain link, plastic, or vinyl fencing specifically not being desired in your comments, in the comments we received. So we can also include that specific language within the fence standards, or just do what we want to see as opposed to what we're prohibiting.
My first instinct is, we want fences, not major like walls, I think. So maybe being clear, I guess I do have a question. Are wood and wrought iron the only two materials allowed?
Currently, that's the language.
Okay. So, and then there's no standard or language around how transparent we want these fences. So it could be, a privacy fence that's like a deer fence that's slatted together really close so you can't see through, or...
Well, first off, is that, you say yes, is that yes to it's written that way, or that's what the code is currently?
Currently, the code is written to allow for only wood or dark wrought iron for projects that are using the objective design standards specifically. Anything using the flexible design review, they could propose whatever. It may get denied, but it may not. We don't have any project materials like vinyl or plastic that are specifically prohibited. We do discourage barbed wire, electrified fencing, and razor wire. And we don't have a specific height requirement. Well, I guess we do. We do already have a 6-foot height requirement.
6 foot, yeah.
Yeah.
It's usually 6 foot in residential areas unless you are butting to a commercial, and then it's 8 foot for most of America, I believe.
It seems like you might have this covered, but the transparency is the only part that's not covered.
Well, in transparency, if you have a fence to keep a dog in and the dog can see every single thing that's going on, the neighbors are going to be complaining about it barking on a regular basis.
There's also the location. If you only want to see it on the sides and rear, we don't have that specific language in the fence section.
I think
If you don't want to see a full 6-foot solid fence on the front setback, that's probably something we may want
I think that's in there already. I think 3
it?
feet is a max unless there was a certain, you can bring it up to 4 under certain conditions.
For a single family. For
Yeah.
multi-family, we don't have any setback requirements. Or we do have setback requirements, actually. Sorry.
Is it good the way it is?
What does the requirement for multifamily look like right now? I mean, we don't want something that looks like siege architecture to be allowed in any in any of the standards. But you can put a fence around a multifamily right now? How tall can it be? I apologize for not having read the entire code yet.
That's okay. I'm kind of doing this on the fly as well. So we do have setbacks in the multifamily residential zoning district. So because of that, we have front setback standards depending on the size of the parcel. So if we're saying it's less than an acre, you can have a 3-foot high front yard setback and a 6-foot side or rear yard setback.
That's a height, that's a fence height,
That's a
correct?
fence height. And we don't have any screening or requirements specifically for multifamily unless it's adjacent to like an industrial project where the industrial project would have to do screening.
It seems like it's covered.
Yeah, my only concern is you see a lot of fencing that's made out of what I call chicken wire or something a little bit thicker than that, which keeps kids and animals in people's yards. So I don't know if that would be okay for a multifamily that's trying to accomplish the same objective.
You mean like a hog rail fence that they put around a play yard or a dog park?
Well, you have like that rectangular, they're 2x4 rectangular grid, and I'll see people put 2x4s across the top, 4x4s with a 6-foot span. With that, it's not a chain link; it's
But
that
it's-
rectangular all the way around and keep their kids in the yard.
Crusher screen.
Crusher screen. There you go. That's in the definitions. I saw that. So, do we want to allow that, or yay, nay? That's the only thing I could come up with. Otherwise,
So it'd be like a mixed materials fence, say, but
yeah,
within limitations. Like, how do we define that
Yep,
in
yeah.
an objective?
You might just have to say that type. I mean, it's a cousin to chain link fence when you get right down to it.
Okay.
People use the crusher screen or hog rail or whatever the brand names are on their deck fencing. But if we don't like the looks of it on lot fencing, we should say
Okay.
that it's not allowed.
and we're just looking at the objective anyway. So
Yeah.
let's just leave it the way it is. Next, please. Thank you, Yumi. Jenna, you're awful quiet over there. Are SRI coatings sufficient to meet the needs for solar reflectivity if white roofs are prohibited, or should white roofs be allowed for flat roofs? Coral, this is your bailiwick.
I'm going to defer to Sammy because I think she knows about
This one was mine.
SRIs. Are the SRI coatings enough? Because I would not want to be looking at a white roof from my, wherever, if I had the nice. I know if it's from an elevated view, maybe it's not visible from the street, but if somebody has a deck up on High Street, they don't want to be looking down at a white roof.
Sure, and I think that's covered in how the design standard is written, or how the objective design is written. But I don't think we should disallow it just because of the numerous benefits that they do have, which is stronger than just putting a coating on a darker colored roof, especially if it's flat, especially when half the year roofs are white anyway, for, natural reasons or natural causes. But I don't think we should disallow it. I do think that the protections around where the roofs can be viewed is strong language that would not allow for that situation, if I read it right. And then the only thing that we are missing, I noticed reading through again for this meeting, was we're not requiring, and I know our architect friend may not be happy with this comment, but we're not requiring any SRI value or solar reflectivity in pavers or concrete. Like, some colors have different SRI values. Lighter colors obviously are higher in reflectivity than darker colors. We don't address that at all, which would be another area to consider if we wanted to.
So you're saying that might be a missing section.
Or just when we talk about, do we talk about, actually now that I'm thinking about it, do we talk about, and maybe Yumi, right off the bat, what materials are allowed for driveways, walkways?
We did talk about walkways. The driveways are driven by our development or our engineering division, which requires asphalt in the right of way, but they do allow for concrete and pavers on private property, I believe, but there isn't any specific SRI value associated with them.
it's just another place where you can have an, impact on hardscape. But if we don't think it's necessary or don't want to, we don't have to dig into it. But that's just another space where you can also require solar reflectivity.
If we go back to the roof, where did you land?
I think how they updated the roof is fine. I'm okay with white roofs. That's just my opinion.
Okay. Let's see. I'm just looking through the MWA letter, and is there something on SRI in there? I think we're good the way it's written then?
I'm not fond of looking at white roofs personally, but if there's not a good reason to prohibit them.
Do you mean just in general, or like
I mean,
from?
from a technical standpoint, if there's no reason to prohibit them, I can't say no there. From an aesthetic standpoint, I don't have a lot on High Street, or don't have an elevated view in which I look down it, but I wouldn't want to look down on a large expanse of flat white roof in the summertime. So every roof is white in the wintertime, but one that would stand out like a sore thumb in the non-snow season. That would be my only objection to it.
And I don't want to necessarily open up this can of worms, but I know a lot of other communities, and some of these ordinances I've written are like a productive roof ordinance. So either it's a white roof with a high solar reflective value, it's solar panels covered in solar panels, which with the new code update is essentially what's going to happen anyway, or it's used for another productive use, which is either a rooftop garden, or, deck space, or a vegetative roof. So like combination of those have been allowed, or if you don't feel comfortable doing one, you're allowed to do a different, or combinations of those types of things. But that kind of gets into a whole nother level of roof design.
And many of those, well, the examples, I'm sure there are other things you could put up there, but none of those would be appropriate in our climate.
Right, for year-round roof use here. But
So I think I'm hearing that we're okay with the way it's written. Yes? Yes? Yeah. Next, is mirrored design sufficient to reduce potential costs?
I don't have an answer, but I think it's good that we're including it in terms of just halving the number of designs that are needed.
I think it's a question for you.
And just to clarify, I understand it doesn't reduce all the costs, but it is a cost-saving measures that we're trying to incorporate.
It's
Is it enough?
It's something. Is it enough? And then do you deal with having the mirrored houses? I grew up in a subdivision. My buddy, 6 houses down, had the exact opposite house. However, I will say over time, they look different. People do different things to them. They extend them in different, they paint them different. They change the roofs. The insides get changed. My mom changed the kitchen and theirs didn't. So they had the original. I mean, they change over time. So I'm okay with it.
If mirror design isn't enough, is there something else that we could incorporate in terms of the number of designs, other than reducing the number of designs?
Well, that just cut the design in half.
Well, it reduced it by one. If you had 5, well, if you're going to have 2 mirrored designs, yeah, it cuts it in half.
Right. So
But-
if you had to have 4 building designs, I think the first classification had 4.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have 2 with 2 mirrors. That just cut it in half. Your design costs. But the build costs remain the same. So it only helps with the upfront design costs, that's it. And then you're living with that forever, for the rest of your life, in theory. However, like I say, growing up in one of those neighborhoods and watching them get changed as time went on, it wasn't that bad. But initially, it has a suburban feel to it, for sure.
Unless there's a suggestion, unless we have a suggestion for otherwise reducing the number of, or to otherwise reducing the costs associated with a number of different designs required, I would have to say then it is sufficient based on what you just said.
Then I think we're good with it, is what I'm hearing.
So in the presentation, I thought I heard that the number of the building variety numbers was reduced, but it looks to me like the edits increased the requirement.
Yes.
Was it just the way it was worded that threw me off? Because it looks like we went from 5 to 6 designs. That increases the number of designs required for projects with 11 to 20 parcels.
Yes, we increased it by, and then reduced it by
With the
mirroring.
mirrored?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other standards that we are missing? Should any be removed? I think as we go down, we can kind of cover that as we go through, because I know like the roof one for me should go. And what needs to be clarified or defined, I think again, let's just start going down it and we'll get those two questions as we go, if that works for the other commissioners. Okay, so with that being said, if we were to start on, what is it, 34 pages of all the 44 pages? 34.
The footer says 34. That was on the other.
Without track changes, it's 39 pages.
All right, let's go to page 1 and let's just start. Just keep moving forward.
I have nothing on 1 or 2 or 3.
I got so much junk here. Hold on. I think my first one comes up at roofs.
What page is that, Commissioner Claren?
The bottom of my sheet here says page 21 of 34.
Okay, mine first one's on page 4,
So then you're first.
unless Commissioner Taylor has ones before that.
I just had a question related to kind of the rollout of this. Like, will staff, just on the review process, provide like a handout or checklist for project applicants to help make this easier to know which process to go, how to use the standards, something like that? That was just my
Yes,
Okay.
once it's adopted, we will be creating
implementation.
other
guidelines.
documents.
Great. That was my first one.
I like the way you laughed at that.
Yep, another thing we have to
More,
do.
more is more.
Okay, so page 4, this is, and I think this is a quick question, it's about, so the orientation for passive solar gain, we have the diagram and the 30 degrees. If a house is oriented, and I just don't know how the regulations apply. If it's oriented for more passive solar gain, does that reduce the amount or the need to put the PV panels up? Is that why you would allow the orientation change?
I believe it's to allow for the sun to warm the house.
No, that's
Not
passive.
to-
Yeah, I know what
yeah. Oh,
passive
okay.
solar gain is, but so if I look at this, so we're allowing this to be okay. Don't make the facade face the street, so that we can get passive solar gain. Seems like the reason to do that would be is if it removed some other requirement, like you could reduce the number of PVs you have to put up, or
Isn't it a good
I
thing to
doubt
get
it.
passive solar regardless if you
Not
have
in
PV?
July.
It'll
but yeah.
just reduce. I mean, I think then. I mean, it'll have to be put into an energy model, and that determines kind of the energy use and the solar panel requirements. But it would be to reduce in the winter heating costs, inefficiency. And then I'm assuming based on how the Title 24 and Energy Code works, you would also be, in order to meet building performance standards, you'd have to put in some sort of shade screening for either vegetation or a awning or overhang to reduce solar gains in the summer.
Okay, so that's just this will be nice in the summer. It's not there's no regulatory reason for requiring or providing more flexibility in that respect. Page 10. Does that mean you have anything before page 10? Okay, so parking structures. It looks to me, if I read through these, it looks like if have a multifamily thing and we're in the sort of the downtown areas, from 0 to 100 units could have surface parking. If I read that all right.
That's correct.
That's a lot of surface parking in the downtown area. And
It is.
it seems like that's not something we want to look at. I assume those edits were requested or made to increase affordability. I believe it's cheaper to build a parking lot than a parking structure, but that's a lot of parking spaces.
I guess to clarify, so parking structures in terms of the parking structure and the podium parking, it's up to 100. There's a requirement for parking garages.
Yeah, so it's like
Yeah.
0 to 100 would be surface, 100 to 200 is podium, and 200 plus units. So if we had a 99 unit building, if we did all of our little parking calculations, how many parking places would that be?
It'd be at least probably 200 parking spaces.
A 99 unit building would require, that's a lot of parking spaces I mean, I don't know what the likelihood of someone building a 99 unit building in one of those zones is, but that seems like a real excessive amount of open asphalt, even if it has nice vegetation and stuff in it. I feel like, I mean, raising it from 50, can you perhaps maybe help me understand why that was done? Was that in response to a comment we received from the public?
It's mostly based on the feasibility factor. Parking structures in Truckee are pretty cost prohibitive. Really, the only way I believe a true parking structure, multi-tiered parking structure would get constructed is by the town or a public entity for the benefit of the community.
And what would, I don't know if I could get a feel for the likelihood of if somebody came in with a wonderful, at least somewhat attainable housing project that was multifamily and said, yeah, that's great, so we're going to put in 200 new parking spaces in downtown Truckee, there wouldn't be any space left for anything else. It doesn't seem practical. These numbers don't seem practical to me.
And really looking at it, the particular zoning districts it's allowed in, there isn't that much land that's available for parking structures. This is probably something we could pare down or try to make more, I guess, responsive to our existing environment within the downtown. But there really aren't that many opportunities for 200 or more units in the historic downtown.
So the likelihood of this applying, well, I guess that means that we're going to have things that are smaller number of units, 100 or less, 50 or fewer, and then we're going to have big parking lots. It doesn't seem like the numbers work for a pedestrian-activated downtown area. But if the structures may mean that you can't build something affordable, we're kind of, I see where this whole housing thing is being coming. I don't know how to fix it, but the numbers seem too high. The number of units seem to be too high before you have to start doing something like podium parking or a structure.
I think that probably the more feasible area to focus on is the podium parking. We do have one project with podium parking within our community. So if you want to look at reducing the numbers there, that may be more feasible. I do want to point out currently our development code does require that the parking spaces, at least one parking space per unit has to be in a fully enclosed space. So that is another layer of standard that's on top of this objective design standard. So a developer would have to do a parking structure or a garage or podium parking to meet the standards of that other standard that already exists in our development code. However, in the recent history of Truckee, I guess all of the history of Truckee, many of our larger multifamily housing projects all have surface parking. They've asked for that waiver consistently for affordable housing, especially for affordable housing projects. So I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but I just wanted to give you a fuller context of what this means and how it will impact projects within our community.
It helps me to understand that there will at least be a discussion around it, and I guess that's what I can ask for.
And I have another question. So based on some of the affordable projects that have been built in Truckee, how many of them have gone after like a parking reduction as part of their density bonus or whatever?
So within the density bonus law, if you're doing any affordable housing, you are provided the parking reduction automatically. It's not considered a density bonus. So they all have used that.
So it's not likely that we would see a 200 unit building with 400 parking places.
That's correct.
You also, it doesn't necessarily have to be one big building with 200 units in it either. Right? I mean,
Yeah,
probably
I'm not
gonna
worried
have
about
that.
the scale of the building. I think that's covered in these standards. What I'm worried about is giant parking lots downtown. It's great that we have some more parking downtown right now. That makes it a little better for everybody, but big expanses of surface parking, I don't think are in with what I think we're trying to achieve in maintaining the community character of our downtown
Well,
district.
I think the codes almost dictate that you can't build a 200 unit project because of all the things you have to do. You're not going to fit 200 in there.
I think that's, where we
So if you're
got to,
going
yeah.
with little units and they have their own parking areas, you're good. Is that right?
I'm on to page 21 now, Mitch.
So am I, Sammy?
Yeah, wait, let's jump ahead.
All right, so I'm going to start off on this one, and so the following roof type shall be permitted: gable, including clipped gable and A-frame roofs. Then it says you can't have a maximum roof slope of 6 and 12. I don't think you can have an A-frame that's a 6 and 12. I'm not an architect, but I'm pretty sure you can't even do that. And then number C, or letter C, specifically shows the 7 and 12, which I pointed out to Yumi, and she suggested we talk about it here. So I think the shed roof minimums and maximums should go. It
So
should
I just
be removed.
want to clarify, the gable roof doesn't have a maximum or a minimum slope. It's just the shed type roofs.
And that's
Isn't an
supposed to
A-frame
say
a shed
1 to-
type roof?
So the gable in that number 1 includes A-frame roofs.
Gable including clipped gable and A-frame roofs.
And then there's no pitch.
Oh, then shed
maximum.
roofs with a minimum slope. What's the point of having any minimum or maximum? I'm still confused on that.
I might turn that over to design workshop, but I think it's just to maintain the character of our community, just to ensure that no out of character, weird, new.
Really? So I built 150 houses and 140 of them have 8 and 12 or more.
Shed roofs.
Yeah. So. Yep. It's shed's roof. Yeah.
Are they gable roofs or are they shed roofs? Typically, I've seen that's a gable roof. So there's no.
Oh, they're gables, right. Okay.
And the shed roof is kind of one side as opposed to the gable. Gable has 2 sides, the shed roof has 1 side, and so
So
typically.
a shed roof, it goes across the entire building going
Yeah.
one way.
My house is a shed roof. Yeah. So what in number 2 is that? What's that supposed to say? 4 to 12 on the first one?
It says 1 to 12. 1.
It was 4, and then they took the 4 out and put it
There
in.
was
Oh,
some
but you
back-end
can't see the
discussion.
cross through the
Yeah.
4.
There's some discussion about that. If they want to change that, that's at your discretion.
So I guess the purpose of the maximum 6 and 12 is so you're not, one side of your house isn't 14 feet tall above the plate line.
Do we need to have something? We don't have 4 to 12 gable roof and a 7 to 12.
No, I was confused. I got it now.
But under
That was a clarifying question.
under C, under C, the roof types there, the gable roof type there is maximized at a 7 to 12 pitch.
That's just an example to provide clarity that you can have multiple types of roof pitches to
Okay, so
constitute one roof
we
type.
don't have that. Okay.
And then there's, as Yumi said, there's no minimum or maximum on the gable. But when you have a pitch greater than 712, then there needs to be some snow retainage considerations. That's what D2 is talking about.
So is this a shed roof? with clear story windows in it?
Yeah, yes, they're both 2 different shed roofs.
And just for clarification, in Part C there, up to 2 roof types are allowed per building, however, multiple pitches are permitted. That's still, even if you have 2 roofs that are the same type but different pitches, that's 1 roof type. So you would need a second.
That's correct.
Okay. So do you think?
Yeah, if you have the clear story, it sort of feels like you're getting enough roof variation that you don't need 2 roof types. Because wouldn't it be weird to stick a gable onto this building somewhere? I think it would.
And the language doesn't require 2, it just says up to 2. So you could have 1 roof type, or you can have 2, but you can't have 3 or 4 or 5 different roof types. We were trying to say you can't do a butterfly and a shed and a gable and a barrel roof style, right? We were trying to say you can get up to 2, but you can have multiple pitches.
It's become a little more simplified since we also removed the gambrel and
Yeah.
So it would be gable or shed roofs, and those are typically the main roof forms we see in our town. The flat roofs are permitted in some degree, but if somebody wanted to do primarily a flat roof that's on a project that's over 10,000 square feet, they can, but they can also add 1 other roof type if they wanted, which may be weird, but it's an architectural decision.
I'm satisfied with the way it's written, I guess, at this point. A 12 shed roof as well as a 4 and 12 cable roof and a 7 and 12 cable.
We don't anywhere in here require more than 1 different roof type. I really felt like I saw that.
Up to 2
Up
roof
to
types
2,
per
yeah, I
building
felt
shall
like
be
I read
allowed.
it that way, but reading it again and then having our consultants clarify, it does say up to 2, but not 2 are required.
Okay,
There-
projects with 7 or more residential structures. Oh, that's different roof designs for different structures. And sorry, page 20, item 2B, for example, projects with 7 or more residential structures with more than 2 units in each structure. Item B says different roof materials and roof designs. They have to adhere to the following building variation standards. Does that mean between 2 different buildings you have, one building
Yes.
has a different roof design than the other building? That may have been why I thought you had to have 2 on a single building.
Yeah, there's the difference between a single building versus the development as a whole. And
Okay.
so development as a whole, you need to have different roof styles. On a single building, you can have up to 2 types.
And why is that? Why is there a restriction on how many roof types?
In general, once you get to having 3 different roof types, it is maybe less characteristic of what the current development pattern is, and can be a little bit confusing to read from an architectural perspective. And so trying to encourage kind of simplified buildings that are true to Truckee's existing character and true to that kind of mountain environment was the idea here. We also heard through the community engagement about what types of roofs are most characteristic and should be continued versus what should not be. And we heard a lot about gable roofs and shed roofs being particularly appropriate.
I think in the historic district, you see all kinds of conglomerations of roofs as people added onto their buildings. But yeah, not in, as Jessica was saying, not in current construction.
And I'm going to say what I say pretty much every meeting, 250 people out of 15,000 is 2%. So I don't want to be making rules on 2% of the people's opinion.
And
I-
workshops and discussions in
alright.
in the
I
general
don't know why
planning
we're
process.
restricting it. I don't get that. I don't
Well,
see it.
if we don't restrict it, are we risking Frankenstein buildings in new constructions that meet the objective standards?
That
I
was
mean,
our.
I can only think of like driving through Lahontan, how many roofs are on those homes, and that's a lot of roof and roof styles on single-family homes.
So,
So are you suggesting that we just, maybe we don't restrict it? Or
Well,
are you,
it's
are
not
you
my
saying
personal
perhaps
aesthetic.
it wasn't the desired aesthetic?
I think it was their desired aesthetic, but does that fit in with the town? I think is the question that we're faced with.
so I've got a flat roof building with a shed on one side, and I want to put a gable over the entryway. Now I can't do it.
Can you say that again?
So I got a mostly flat roof building with a shed roof on one piece of it to break up to give it architectural relief, and then I want to put a gable in the front entryway.
Yeah, the way that
So
this
this-
is written.
So it's got a flat roof, a shed roof, and a gable, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
And I do want to point out, this is for multifamily only, not for single family.
That's where the flat roof comes in. And we're kind of getting bogged down in the weeds, but
It needs to look good.
I mean, I guess would there be space then to talk about that in the entry design standard? Because there's a
I just brought that up as an example.
well, I mean, I
you
think
know.
it's a good example because that does actually make sense if you want a covering over your entryway that meets the standards. But does that count as a third roof type?
That's-
So maybe there's a way to.
Maybe say that the entries are, but you could have some really weird entries
know.
then.
I just hate to be restrictive. So restricting and
that.
having a lot of regulations ends up restricting the architectural flow or the creative flow if you're trying to make things different. So instead of, again, and I said this last month too, you end up having the cookie cutters. The more regulations you have, the more everything starts to look the same. I.e., all the roofs that you see in Lahontan is the opposite. They made you put all those roofs. And it's too many, is what you're saying. So,
And a quirky third roof type is maybe consistent with, quirky, a different,
I'm
different
just-
third
Yeah.
roof type perhaps
Quirky
is
was
more
fine.
consistent with Truckee funk. I don't know.
I think
Perhaps
you're
it
right.
is.
Like I agree with that now that we've gotten into it. Like we want that little
Let
bit
it-
of
let it-
quirk
let 'em-
and funk.
Let it flow. How many? Do we have to say how many, or do we
no,
not
that's what I'm
restrict
saying.
it?
Just don't restrict it. Just take that out and keep moving on.
You would just remove item C there on page 21 then, right? Quick thing, could you guys do the track changes in something that's readable by a scanner next time? That was a little technical challenge. In the color. It's non-photo blue. Had to hack that one.
It's non-photo blue.
I was scanning my copy edits, and all of the track changes are in non-photo blue, so they didn't show up in
on
the
a black and white.
Not even very well on the color as well.
Invisible ink.
Worked up on my scrap paper.
I should have just printed the whole thing.
All right, so can we remove C then? Are we good with that?
I'm okay with that.
My next one's on page 26, and it's minuscule. Yumi pretty much took care of it already.
I had to reword the sentence thing on B2 just because it didn't.
Well, no, it was inappropriate colors for me, and I
Oh,
don't
sorry,
get why
page
yellow
22.
is in there. Bright yellow, neon yellow, yes, but bright neon anything is no.
Wait, sorry, page 22?
26.
26.
So inappropriate colors
Oh.
outside of HP is non-fluorescent colors. I get it. Pink, I get it. Purple, I get it. I don't want to look like Jimi Hendrix's house. Yellow. So orange is okay? You know what I mean? Like that's so subjective.
Yeah,
And yellow, that
Orange,
means yellow.
yeah. Orange is okay. Like apparently turquoise is too, so.
Right. And I'd rather live next to a yellow house than an orange one, personally.
Depends on the orange, yeah. Depends whether
I'm
Jimmy's
pretty
playing in the
sure-
house and I can hear it.
Yeah,
I'm
I
pretty
think
sure any yellow would beat any orange. I'm pretty sure about that. So,
I mean, this
Do
is
we need to
probably,
leave out
like,
the examples?
But this is probably the most subjective part. And I was kind of thinking about like the only way to really make it objective would to be like list every Pantone value of every color that's not allowed. But that seems like complete overkill.
Yeah, you'd have a whole
But
booklet just on that.
Exactly. But then how do we make it more objective? Because like yellow, there's light yellow, bright yellow, pale. Like there's so many different yellows. I just think it's a really hard thing to.
Yeah, there's the yellow you're willing
Right,
to
in
live next to and the yellow you're not.
Exactly.
Well, and I use the Richardson house. If you're looking in Truckee and a pretty famous yellow house, there it is. So it's allowed now in the historic district, but why not in Glenshire?
It would be allowed in Glenshire.
It would?
Since it's an existing single-family subdivision.
Oh, there you go. All right.
So this is only related to multifamily. So if there's specific things you want to, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with Commissioner Taylor that we do not want to list all the Pantones. We've discussed that between us and the consultants. And we had the same discussion about what's bright. How do we say what's bright? But if we can try to make it more objective by saying a bright yellow if you'd like, or if there's a specific yellow that you wouldn't like versus one you would like, and try to hope that the developer is willing to work with us in that regard at that time.
I don't want to spend a whole lot of time. It's just yellow. It's just one color. I just didn't
Bright
get
accent colors are allowed. Maybe we just have to trust that they can read that and not include something obnoxious.
Or just remove yellow.
Or it's, since this is kind of the first version of this and there will likely be amendments, if it becomes an issue, maybe in the next iteration, 5 years from now, we can deal with it then and be more specific if we need to.
I think that's a healthy attitude to adopt towards getting these in place so that the staff can move on to other projects. There will be objections to these. There will be proposed revisions to these. I think Kat's going to come back with more specific. I would predict they'd come back with more specific suggestions, as would possibly some other builders or developers or architects. I don't know.
MWA's right here.
So, amendments are possible. I don't know if it's better to pass them and meet the state standards and then work on amendments, or is it better to try to pick at it until everybody's happy?
Well,
not
everybody's going to be happy.
I mean,
Yeah.
you see what works.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
see
I
if
guess
it works.
some of them we just don't
Run
know
it up the
yet.
flagpole.
Yeah, exactly.
Next.
Next.
My next one's on page 43.
Page. This was kind of a clarifying thing I had on page 28, 3A. Brick may be applied to the ground floor of the structure and shall comprise up to 50% of the building facade. It seems like that seems weird to me in an ODS. It's like should you mean and shall be a maximum of 50% of the. Are you trying to limit the amount of brick? Are you trying to encourage the brick, or are you trying to discourage the brick?
We were trying to put a maximum on too.
Okay, yeah, then I would stick the words "a maximum" in there.
Yep.
A shall be a maximum of. I don't need to do anything there. I don't think I have. 36. Why did we make it smaller? In the storage units. Did we make that smaller to make things more affordable and just make it just big enough for a bike? Is that what that is?
We made it smaller based off of some language, some comments we received about the size of the previous storage square footage.
Those seemed like nice storage sizes you had before, and would hate to have us end up with more multi-family buildings all around the town whose balconies are filled with stuff like we have now. So I guess I just object to it being smaller. I understand that it may have to be smaller for affordability reasons. Just wanted it noted. for my other two commissioners, on page 39, I suggested that we add a tangent line to the figure for designers or who perhaps don't know what a tangent line is. But just to immediately clarify what's meant there. So, just for the example structure that's on the curved thing, show the tangent line so that you can see it's perpendicular to that. And you have one, 48? I don't have a 48.
43.
Oh, okay.
It was just the maximum multifamily residential unit sizes.
I sent in a comment on that one. That does seem small.
It's really small. And I don't know why there's a size limitation at all.
So to give you a little background on where that 1,000 square feet came from, that was from our Innovate Gateway strategy, which was another planning process that we went through that looked specifically at the Gateway area, where most of our mixed-use buildings will probably likely go in the future. And as part of that, our consultant and then our council ultimately approved that plan to require a maximum average 1,000 square feet for living areas within mixed-use buildings. And that's intended to drive a variety of housing types. You can have a 2,000 square foot unit as long as you have a 500 square foot unit. You can have only 1,000 square foot units if that's reasonable to you. But that's where that language came from. We did receive multiple comments about that from our commission as well as from the public, and where other even small changes to that number were proposed. We will forward those to the council, but since that was language that was ultimately decided by council, we didn't change it at this moment, but it is something we can forward as a discussion topic if you do think that there should be a change in that number.
So I heard you correctly, you can have a 500 square foot unit and a 2,000 square foot unit as long as they're averaging around 1,000 for the building itself or the project.
Yes, that's correct.
That's, okay, because I wasn't sure what maximum average meant, so that's what I mean.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know.
That seems
That's
like it might work out okay. I was concerned that as long as, however they were calculating it, didn't exclude the possibility of multiple bedroom apartments or flats or condos or whatever. I guess it would be flats. Because, if we're trying to make housing affordable, sometimes people that most need affordable housings have bigger families. So,
Yeah,
you want to put the family in one unit.
theoretically. Not sure everybody does, but. Anything else on that? I also went through the 262 pages of the actual, because that's the kind of life I have, and came up with a bunch of little comments. Could we go over those, Yumi? Is that all right? And that one she answered, you answered.
Do you want me to pull up your?
Could you please pull that document on our monitors for us so we can see what Mitch is talking about?
The one that Chair Claren actually provided comments on, that one? I don't know if I have.
Yeah, July 13th, 2023 draft. Yep, there we go. So you answered that one. That one has been removed. I don't know, that was a choral thing, or generally. And then should and shall on that page. You're welcome. So this one, next, the site organization. Buildings should be oriented around the positions. That's the one I thought we might want to look at a little bit. Only because other sections in the code say straight at, and I was just concerned that it wasn't consistent. Does it make a difference? Do we care?
So in my minor edits suggestion in my presentation, I did remove the language that said should in random positions. So
I
the
saw
language
that.
would say buildings should be oriented to avoid instances where living spaces of one structure face the living spaces of another and significantly reduce indoor privacy, which I think is aligned with our objective design standards.
Yeah, I thought so too, so we're good with that. Roll-up door you got rid of. Railing, you answered that question. Minor use, I think you took care of that too, right? Maximum site disturbance. I'm not an excavator, I'm just concerned it's not enough.
Not
Just-
enough to do the construction.
Yeah.
So for typical, so this also applies to existing single-family residential homes, but Todd Donner and Glenshire are nowhere near 1.5 acre parcels.
Nope.
So this wouldn't apply because you could technically, under this provision, disturb the whole area. It's just, this is specific to rural residential parcels where we've tried to be cognizant that you have a rural residential parcel to spread out a little and to have more animals or to have other structures on your property. So we tried to find a balance where they would be allowed to do those things as much as possible within reason and while still maintaining open space, the perceived open space that we all appreciate and why we have rural residential as a community.
Any thoughts? Nothing?
And I would say that this is one of the items that we probably will see how it plays out and see how restrictive it is, and then if we need to amend it, we will.
Okay. And it's corrected. You got that? You corrected me on that? We discussed that already. And then, did you see on figure 312 there? And then this sentence. So if you go to the actual page, you see how it just starts with "and public trails"? The page before it is blank. There's like a whole ton of stuff missing.
So I went back and looked at our existing development code, and it looks like it's there, but we can.
Okay. On my computer it wasn't, but that could be my electronic aura doing its thing again. So, it's good. I'm not kidding. You were just there.
Oh.
And
So this
public-
is the section, and then above is the grading and landscaping.
Yeah, see, on the internet, none of that was there.
We're on the internet. I'll do what we can double.
On my internet, it wasn't there. I kept looking and I refreshed it even to make sure. And okay, never
Sorry.
mind.
What was the percentage for 5 acres? 40%? Was that what it was?
30, I thought.
30%? Yeah, that's 65,000 square feet. That seems like you ought to be able to do something in that much space to
Yeah,
enjoy
we'll let
your-
it play
yeah.
out and see what
Yeah.
happens. Do we want to go over the MWA letter quickly, or?
Was there a longer letter you received? We only received the one from
Sean
previously.
Whalen?
Oh, Sean Whalen, okay. Yeah, I have not yet had a chance to review that, but if you would like to at the dais.
Just quickly look at some of what they're saying, just to satisfy since he showed up. And then
Can you pull it up? How many pages is this?
5. And it's got,
Do you have it? Can you pull it up?
I got it. But it doesn't.
It should be in our email. Well,
I pulled it up on my little guy here. I'm so proud of myself. And then, Coral, Sammy, do you have anything else that you wanted to add to any of this, or your comments? Have they all been, any comments you submitted to staff have been incorporated?
Yeah, I think I'm satisfied with, and I thank you guys for taking the time to review all those comments, because I know we sent a lot of stuff in. So I do appreciate you guys,
Yeah.
thoroughly going through them and making changes
Yeah.
where it was appropriate or needed. So I do appreciate that time of staff and the consultant team.
I concur. Thank you.
So if you just want to go through this, and then we could make a decision if we're going to move on.
Did you have any?
No, I
Things you
didn't
wanted
really
to-
have
I
a
did
chance to
review
read
this.
it. One of the problems with being able to take public comment right up to the meeting is you can't see it. And I'm surprised it's even allowed. I would cut it off at 24 hours before.
We do have an allowance, a requirement that, we do caveat it that says, if you give it to us by 2 p.m., then Planning Commission will have the chance to review it. If after, we'll post it, but it's not, we can't guarantee that you'll have the time to review it.
Yeah,
But
so we don't have to look at this. I'm just putting it out there since he showed up.
That's a good caveat, because if we're procrastinating, then we can just say it was because we were waiting for all of them to come in. It seems like some of these, I did look at this, some of these are unnecessarily detailed. And if I look at the first one, if something faces, it faces, it doesn't need to face squarely, for example. So that's an example of extraneous wording that's not needed. That's another thing I like to edit out. But
Okay.
we can go through some of these suggested changes.
Just quickly, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it. Because they did send it in 10 minutes before the meeting or whatever it was, a half an hour.
I guess, do we have any that we feel strongly about? And maybe. I will just say I don't agree with his suggestion to reduce the amount of open space or common outdoor area per unit. I think that's not fair. And, based on a lot of people's experiences during the pandemic, for example, everyone cherished their outdoor space. And I would not want to take that away from people. That's
Yeah, his
comment D.
concept is we already have a lot of open space naturally.
sure,
So
but
it kind of cuts into the building envelope if we have to supply more.
Yeah, I see that, and it does make it more expensive, but outdoor amenities are important, and play space near apartment dwellings is important because the children may not be able to go off to the trails, may not be old enough to go out to the trails, whereas if they're in a common yard or common play area, it might be easier to supervise them or share supervision of them.
You're more likely to use it if it's downstairs
Exactly.
than if
You
it's down the
are.
block.
and it builds
Yeah, and if you-
community,
you
it
know.
creates places to socialize. So I think I wouldn't want that was just the one that stuck out to me is I don't like that one so much. The other one that I saw
I don't
that he-
understand the shared entry. I think it's,
I had a
multifamily
question-
buildings are more, they're taken care of better by their residents. I believe studies have shown if the more they have an individual entrance.
Yeah, I also thought that sentence was really confusing.
Ground floor entries. I don't know what it means.
I don't really know what it means.
Next. Thank you.
Well, so this is a question that came up in our last meeting, was why was brick only allowed in the historic district? So it looks like the commenter's proposing outside the overlay district, but the objective design standards do allow brick, or would allow brick outside the historic district, would they not? Or was that prohibition still in there?
I believe we allowed it. but
Yeah,
that's-
because I already commented on that.
Then I don't understand the comment here.
Maybe he didn't see the changed version.
Could be.
Oh, I guess, are we still limiting it to the ground floor? Brick may be applied to the ground floor of the structure and shall be a maximum of
50%.
50%. Or is his comment, oh, hold on, about the historic
I believe they.
HB or outside?
It, well, looks like he,
Oh, he's saying to remove the gray part,
That's delete.
correct?
Anything gray is delete.
yeah, so brick would be allowed outside the HP overlay district, but it's, in the previous sentence, we allow for brick in mixed-use projects outside of the overlay district. So I guess maybe he wants to allow it more broadly
Yes.
to residential projects outside the.
So this is all multifamily. This is the multifamily section he's commenting on.
Yeah, yeah.
That whole, if
I believe, if you believe that mixed-use projects outside of the HP overlay district is an appropriate location for brick and not specifically in only residential projects, then this language is fine as is without his amendment.
we already made an edit to this that I thought worked. I
Yeah.
don't,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I disagree with the next comment.
Oh, I agree with that.
Yeah, there's-
Yeah.
There were a few other public comments that if we have looked through this one in detail,
If you want to bring other ones up, do it.
then
We're
I would
way
have to
ahead of where I
ask, should
thought
we
we'd
be
be.
looking at the others?
Sure.
There was one comment in particular about should we, are we not hardening the town by requiring all the wood and the,
I guess my question related to that is, do we have, and I can do my own research too, but does staff know if there's any, or do we already have, and maybe we talked about this last month, but any I know there's like Firewise landscaping and all this other stuff.
There is
there
what's known
something
as the Wild
related to-
Urban
Wooey.
Interface.
Woo-
Wooey.
Okay, yeah.
we have Wooey.
But
We have
and there are
Wooey.
standards, and are these in compliance with those standards?
Yeah, well, yes, these are all
Okay.
allowed materials within WUI. There are standards that or application requirements for these materials to ensure that they meet WUI requirements.
Thank you for
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
indulging my ignorance.
No, it's. I only say it that way because I was here when it changed from non-wooey to wooey, and it was huge. It was a big
Okay.
deal.
and we built the house.
Well, now it's
yeah.
fine. After
Yeah.
initially, when it came out, nobody knew what was
Yeah.
wooey and what wasn't, and then what Bill Miller was saying was and wasn't. Was bad.
Okay.
We already did that.
Yeah, we kind of talked about this already. The regular development standards address night sky, do they
And
not?
ridge lines. I read a
Okay.
whole section on it. I don't know about the decarbonization. That's not my.
I mean, I think for construction, that doesn't fit in ODS. It fits in the building code and energy code, so.
Okay.
Although, I guess, and I think adding the pedestrian staff also helps with maybe I think we are starting to address it kind of, so we're thinking
trying.
about it, yeah.
Good. Glad to hear it. So if I read this correctly, Ruth was asking to use the potential. Has Jaboom Street even been submitted officially?
It was in this, it was used as an example in a letter or the staff report, because I did see a picture. Oh, that was in a comment. That was in a public comment.
We don't have a formal application submitted for that project. It was included as part of a public comment in the 2040 general plan process, but since we don't have an actual project in front of you, and we wouldn't anyway at that point, we can't talk specifically about that project.
Okay. But we did get a public comment in which somebody submitted a hypothetical. Okay.
Yes.
So this one we can't address. Know where there's a discussion of rooftop decks?
Yeah.
I think we had a discussion today about.
Yeah, we took care of that part.
Okay, so that is discussed. Sorry, backing up. Coburn Crossing has gable roofs, doesn't it?
The residential component has shed roofs.
Does it? I'll have to drive through there again.
They may have tiny little gables also.
Okay. Oh, they did ask about rolled steel, which I forgot to ask about. We talked
one?
about exterior materials on multifamily dwellings, and rolled steel was not mentioned. I assume it's cost prohibitive to use on a multifamily development unless you're developing luxury apartments, but it wasn't mentioned as an acceptable material for multifamily dwellings.
I believe it is identified as a allowed use, allowed
Where
material.
did I put it?
You start to read so much, it all.
I know, it's like, I don't know,
Blends.
where was that?
So within the exterior cladding materials section.
There it is.
It was on the same page in which I had to look up the word turn treated or something like that.
Well, did you just
Oh, well.
search for the word rolled?
Yes.
Yeah, it's shown there. It's shown there. Exterior cladding materials.
Is it easy?
Yep.
I don't believe we have any other public comment, just your comments as a commission.
And we covered all our, at least the three of us.
Yeah.
All right, then at this time, I'm assuming we are ready for a motion. And I'm just going to throw out there that I've always been taught that it's not illegal or wrong, but it's improper for the chair to actually make a motion because it kind of sways its committee. So I'll always be asking for a motion, but I won't be making one.
I move that we accept the resolution. I move that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 2312. Do I have to read the whole thing?
As stated.
As shown on
As
the,
shown,
with the edits discussed.
with the changes that we have discussed in this presentation related to legal non-conforming site setbacks and minor edits, and the changes we have discussed in our meeting here tonight.
Can we also include the CEQA in that, or is that a separate motion?
With
That's
that,
item 2.
with the resolution, it includes both of them.
Okay,
So I'll second that.
thank you.
Chair Claren,
Aye.
Commissioner Taylor,
Aye.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
That was easier
Thank you
than
for
I
all your
expected.
work.
That was easier than I thought it would be.
All of your notes helped immensely.
And your quick response, Yumi, was awesome. That was it was great to see. Thank you. Okay, staff reports. Any staff reports?
Just a quick update for next month, commission agenda. We potentially will have the Tahoe Donner Ski Lodge back in front of you. We hope to know relatively soon, and we'll let you know. And then potentially have some development code amendments, but we're not totally sure on that yet as well. So as soon as we have that agenda finalized, we'll get that out. That's it.
Commission member reports. Anybody up here on the dais?
I'll just say I used the new bike share over the weekend. It's great. I had a lot of fun. I encourage everyone to get out there.
The B-cycle?
Yeah, the B-cycle. I don't have an e-bike, so super excited that they are now accessible around town.
So we also used them on Sunday, and then put them back in the dock and went and bought 2 new ones.
We're avid e-bike users, and so I definitely we're very excited about it. And even our son was saying he knows where all of the bike share locations are because his friends have heard about them, and I've seen visitors out there using them. I do have a concern about it. There are a lot of what appear to be inexperienced e-bike riders out there. They go faster and they're heavier than our regular bikes. And most of them rode by without helmets on. Not a good thing. I don't know what we can do about that.
That was me.
Protect
wore my
that
helmet.
noggin. Protect that noggin.
Did you wear a helmet?
I did.
Good for you. I have one. I just had
It's
to
just
find
too
it.
scary to not. I don't know. That's,
I'm telling
I just have
Tricia.
to.
She was with me.
Did she have a helmet on?
No. We'll mess up our hair, you know. Do we need a motion to adjourn?
No.
Well, then, we're adjourned. Thank you. Thank you all.